Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest, I'm really excited to have the Rev'd Dr. Lynn Arnold coming on today. Lynn is currently has a couple of main sort of roles. We were just chatting about it before we started recording, and I'm sure Lynn can fill you in. But reader in theological ethics at St. Barnabas College. And once again, which will be really interesting to unpack, the youngest or the most junior, or not, I should say the most junior member of the team, to get that right, Lynn. Sorry, no offense. The most junior member of the team at St. Peter's Cathedral, Adelaide. I've stumbled my way through that introduction. Welcome to the podcast, Lynn.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's great to be with you.
Now, if you cut that snippet out just there, I did introduce you as the youngest member at of St. Peter's Cathedral, Adelaide, and I think you should just take that one and run with it. But in all seriousness, can you, and your background is incredible as well. I can't wait to chat about your story, but can you fill our listeners in on the different things that you are doing today?
Well, really, I guess in one sense I regard myself as semi-retired, but what that includes is that I am the junior on the ministry team at St. Peter's Anglican Cathedral. I preach a bit once every 3 weeks. I run services once a week. I'm part of our Lenten and September study programs and running a retreat in a couple of months. I'm adjunct reader at the Theological College for the Diocese, St. Barnabas, and there I lecture in theological ethics every second year. And I also have a weekly radio program on a Christian radio station, Life FM, which called somewhat unimaginatively, I suppose, Sunday Night with Lynn Arnold. I don't promise a Saturday Night Live sort of program, but it is a very interesting program of people I interview from around the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for filling us in on that. And, you know, I just as a bit of a tangent, something that I found really interesting recently, because I'm in podcasting, I'm always looking at the different ratings and different, you know, just trying to learn from other podcasters. And there's I don't have his name in front of me. Well, I'll sneakily try to look it up while I'm talking so I can tell you. But there's a Catholic priest who has a very, very popular podcast, which really, I think, to be honest, Lynn, it really took me by surprise. But the how popular this podcast is, I know that it's number one in the, sort of the religious podcasts, but it also is quite high up, and it just reflects to me. I think sometimes I'm generalizing here, but people can assume that there isn't a wider interest in let's use the word religion. But I just found that really really fascinating, that just when you look purely at the data of what people are listening to, that people are tuning in, and that's just one show which I'm going to find. I'll find it before the end of the episode. So
well, it interests me, this question, because while this station doesn't do surveying of its weekend programming, so I have no idea how many people are out there other than my wife and my mother and my family. What I do find myself pleasantly surprised by is just going through the community. People say, "Oh, I listened to your program on Sunday," and I don't even know who they are. But so you know, there's an audience out there which can be much wider than you think, and I find that encouraging. Some of the people when I get into conversation with them, it's clear they're Christians, but I've even had some who are not Christians at all, who can occasionally be listening to the program.
Yeah, that's I think it is one of those things that I think we can make the mistake of really assuming, and I mean society in this area. I think we can make some assumptions about this, and that's why I think it's really interesting to look at the data. I found the one. I think this is the one I was talking about. It's definitely so Friar Mike Schmitz, and it's the Ascension Catholic Faith Formation, the Bible in a Year. And as an example, that's number one in the religious religion and spirituality on Chartable, but it's also quite highly rated when it comes to overall podcasts. I'll try to tell you. Here it is. Okay, so I'm literally looking at it, so I'm not making up facts. This is from chartable.com. Just to make sure I'm getting my facts right. So in America, so Apple Podcasts, specifically Apple, United States of America, all podcasts, this is number 19. So the 19th most popular podcast in all of America on Apple is The Bible in a Year with Friar Mike Schmitz. Isn't that interesting?
That's very interesting. Well, it sets me a goal to go for. I might rethink the programming for next year. But for all of that, it's been I've had some pretty interesting guests on. I've had John Lennox on a couple of times now, and I've had Greg Sheridan from the Australian and the author of a couple of
Yes.
fascinating books on Christianity. John Dixon. I've had a soapy staff from America on too, Jonathan Jackson,
Oh, wow.
who used to star on General Hospital and Nashville, but he is a profound theological thinker,
Mm.
and I've had him on a couple of times, and want to have him on again.
Well, I want to encourage all of our listeners, whether you're religious or not, and as we just discussed, I think for a lot of people, regardless of their religious beliefs, there's an interest. And so Sunday nights with Lynn Arnold, and you can look that up. Well, thank you for going with me on that tangent. I just thought that would be really interesting, and there's a little
Hmm.
fact for you about podcasting, but I'm more interested in you
Yes,
sharing.
I'm gonna look that up. So thank you indeed.
I'm more interested in hearing you share, to tell you the truth. I want to start. There's so much to your story. Let's start by admitting that we're not going to get to 100th of it, because your career so far is really, from looking at your career, Lynn, I find it fascinating. So we're not going to get to everything, but we'll cover some. We'll cover some things. I'll ask about some key moments, and I want to
Hmm.
start right at the beginning, not even of your career, but if you think back to your childhood and growing up, what are some moments or even some themes from that season of your life, Lynn, that really shaped you into the person and the leader that you are today?
Well, I've said this in some talks I've given about my life, that I think the greatest gift that my parents, my very, very loving parents, gave my sister and I is the capacity for change, to accept change, to not only accept change, but to be excited by it. And the way in which they delivered that gift was that by the time I was 12, I had been to 8 primary schools, and that wasn't because I was being expelled. It was because we'd ended up living in 4 different countries. And so the constancy of change in my growing up meant that I was constantly given the opportunity to meet new people, make new friends, and also cope with sort of moving on from friends who I'd had before, not necessarily dropping them, keeping contact in some cases over many, many decades. And I'm so grateful that my parents gave me that, because it
Hmm.
meant that I've been able to have a career where I felt very blessed that I have moved on to quite radically different types of work, which have involved being able to accept change as the norm.
You know what? That's so interesting that you start there, because I've been surprised doing this podcast how much I've learned, and how much there have been really surprising patterns that have stood out to me. And this is top three, is the number of times. I cannot tell you how many guests, if people go back and listen, maybe they can do a count for me, the number of times when it comes to, what part of your childhood had maybe some of the biggest impact on how you lead, or how you led through your career. And it comes up again and again, exactly what you just mentioned. People talk about moving around when they're younger, and not everyone. And when
Mm.
when you're walking out there, chatting with people in life, not everyone thinks of it fondly. But I do find that leaders who have that as a formative background when they grew up, they consistently look back to it and go, "There's something about moving friendship groups and having to adjust,
Mm.
that really does build. It seems to build resilience. It seems to build this ability to handle change." Which, yeah. So it's just interesting that yet another guest,
On, on,
Lynn,
on,
mentions that again. Wow.
Yeah, you're quite right. On one side, it's building resilience, which is a kind of capacity building. But on another side, which I really liked, is it was exciting. You'd
Yes.
come across new situations, new communities, and as a kid, as a young person, I really, really enjoyed having new encounters. So I wasn't sort of having to strengthen myself and armor myself up to cope.
Sure.
Well, maybe I was, but I was actually finding that this was quite a joyride.
And do you think that was more to do with you and how you're wired, or was a big part of that how your parents set the temperature around you to handle those different situations?
Well, that's a very interesting way you put the question. My parents brought both my sister and I up with the capacity that this was situation normal. There was never even the possibility, oh dear, how are you coping, kids? I don't ever recall that question being asked. They loved us dearly, but they just assumed we would go with the flow. Now, my father had been born and brought up in one country and didn't end up leaving it until, apart from war service, until he was 30. Um, but then very quickly got into this habit of moving around quite a lot. My mother had had a bit more of a changing background to her life. But it was just the way in which you approach it, that if you approach a situation with children that presumes there is a problem and you're going to help them cope with the problem, versus here's a new opportunity, and present them as something that, wow, you've got a real gift being given to you.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think that is it's a mindset, and I'm probably particularly aware of this right now, Lynn, because my wife Liz and we have our first child, little Roman, is 12 weeks this week. So I'm right at
Oh,
the
wow.
I'm right at the beginning stages of parenting, going, okay, so I've got this little sponge smiling up at me, and what do I want him to be absorbing? Because he is absorbing everything.
Well, my wife and I, when we had our children, we had a lot of children very close together. We had 5 children under 3 years, 10 months, 4 of whom were under 17 months, and we happily went traveling with them at the very youngest age. Traveling long distances to Europe and America in economy class with 2 babies, because we had 2 sets of twins. Um, Sometimes had its own challenges, but they got used to very early on. That's what we do.
Oh, that's good to hear. Maybe I'll have to ask you more about that, because that's what we're considering at the moment. The weighing up different international, how we're going to approach that as a family, international travel. But we do hear from a lot of people. Obviously, everyone's different, but that particularly when they're really little, it can be actually quite. It can be a good time to travel with kids, even when they're really little,
Hmm.
because they're not running around everywhere. Well, Lynn, I want to let's move on to the next stage of your life, and I want to ask you about one of your earliest
Mhm.
leadership opportunities. As you think back in your life, can you remember one of the first times you were really in the deep end as a leader? You were managing a group of people. You were responsible for
Well,
a
at
project.
university, I was very active in the anti-war movement. I had a strong, conscientious objection to the policy of the government at the time. Strongly opposed our going to war in Vietnam, and therefore became very active at a university age in the opposition to that, and ultimately became the co-leader of that at the state level. It meant I had to learn very quickly to deal with some pretty tense situations, some aggressive situations, and try and do so in a spirit of trying to bring people on the journey, because I believe strongly that war was unjust, and therefore one of my tasks was not only to protest about it, but to try and argue the case for others that they might come along and see my argument.
And when you were, I mean, it sounds like you were sort of thrown into that at a young age, like you said, because of your passion. Which, looking at your career, it's obviously clear that that there's a deep passion for justice, which is, it's really obvious just looking at your career and where you've invested your time and your energy, Lynn. What are your biggest learnings as a young leader with this passionate topic, like you said, in difficult conversations and conflict with people who thought completely differently? Do you remember what was some of the biggest lessons from that stage of leadership?
Well, I think a big learning for me then, which has influenced a lot of my approach to things since then, and I'm going to use a 21st century jargon word or phrase, but which we didn't know then, and that is, don't get caught up in an echo chamber. Here I was part of a movement that had strong views about the war, and it would have been easy for us just to talk amongst ourselves, reinforcing our own views, and end up being cut off from the broader community. And yet, if you actually believe in something, you want others to understand what you're arguing and hopefully have them come along too. So you need to break out of the echo chamber, which can ultimately become highly dangerous because it can end up driving you to extremist self-formed loops of reinforcement,
Yeah.
where you're not actually being challenged by opposing views. So it really was a very early education for me that the creative tension of ideas is a vital part of being in leadership. If you're not going to accept that in a democracy, particularly, you're supposed to be having this creative tension of ideas, and ultimately, of course, it would be why I would go into Parliament, because I would feel it was so important there. That you just not end up being, as I say, in these echo chambers.
And getting really practical, because I think it's amazing that you're talking about echo chambers. Like you said, you didn't have that term then, but you're looking back at that as an early leadership lesson. And echo chambers is such a big challenge today, I really see, because social media and I think a lot of the algorithms are built to reinforce echo chambers. Not and to be honest, I don't know if the
Well,
intention
they are, because
is negative. A lot of the time, it's
they are
just
built.
what are people interested in. So yeah, so how do you handle that? What practical tips would you give for leaders listening, particularly young
Well,
leaders? How do we break
can
down
I
our
put
echo
it
chambers?
between? Sorry, there's a polarization, I think, between two things. Either you can go sloganeering, or you can go into argument, and I mean argument in the most positive sense of the word. And you mentioned the dangers of social media, and they have a strong capacity to reinforce sloganeering. I am active on some forms of social media, but I try in that situation to be posing reasons for points of view, and to actually encourage people to participate in a dialogue about those points of view, rather than just sloganeering. I don't like the cheap shot slogan that makes me feel good because I've thumped my chest and got something off my chest. I'd rather sort of end up in some kind of discussion with other people. And so, frankly, some forms of social media are a little bit hard for that. Twitter, for example, is a bit hard for that.
Yeah. So fast forwarding from there, and like I said, we're not going to be able to get to your whole career so far because there is so much to it. But as a way of jumping to the next point, I'd love to ask you from there, from that point, you're at university. Wow. Okay. Suddenly you're passionate about that that the war is wrong, and then you're finding your voice. I'm interested in the next leadership ceiling from there. Suddenly, you're dealing with a lot. You're in the deep end. As you think over the next years or decades, I'm always interested, Lynn. I guess I'm phrasing the
Well,
question this way because so many organizations hit a ceiling with number of staff, and I'm always interested in leaders hitting a ceiling where you go, "That's it. I need to find something new, or learn something new, or bring in something new into how I do things to break through this." So, yeah, do you remember when that next ceiling was for you after university as a leader?
from being at university, I went into teaching, and I was thrown in at the deep end because we were so desperately short of teachers at that stage. I hadn't even finished my degree, and I was able to get a job as a teacher. But I was appointed to a school that had lots of what we might call socioeconomic challenges. And so I very quickly had to learn that I was in a quite different environment to the somewhat comfortable university environment and the area where I'd grown up. I was now in an area where there was lots of real challenges facing the students I was before. And what struck me when I compared my own high school background was I had been brought up in a high school where the presumption was all of us would go to university. Here I was in a community where amongst the teachers in the school, there was even the view that, well, these kids aren't going to go to university. And I was quite dismayed to encounter that attitude from the very people who were supposed to be leading them on. So one of the roles I tried to play as an untrained teacher, I was doing my teacher training by night school while I was teaching in the classroom by day, was to try and encourage these kids to actually look at real opportunities for going further in life. And I had what I don't want to be too immodest about this, but I felt I had quite a degree of success in helping some of these kids develop a higher horizon to look at than otherwise they had always been told about.
That's interesting because it's, I guess, some of that skill set with what you learned in the classroom there. Did you find there were some parallels then into your career in politics and then in leadership in the not-for-profit space? Did you find that there were parallels from what you learned in the classroom with
Oh,
students to,
absolutely.
yeah, what were they?
Absolutely. Well, quite a number of. First of all, that do not make presumptions about what people are capable of, or, in your opinion, not capable of. Always hold the view that they're capable of much more than many people give them credit for. Point one. Point two, and it would be something that would be a very important part of the development of the overseas aid sector, and that is the rights of people with whom you work. You know, these teachers of whom I'm critical in the school I was teaching at did not actually presume, and being sweeping here, it was only some of the teachers. They did not presume that these kids had a right to a bigger future than they assessed for them. In the overseas aid sector, one of the things that was a coming of age for the sector in the 1990s was that the people you work with in countries of the South, or third world countries as we used to talk about them, have rights. Uh, they do not owe it to you to let you do good things for them. You have to earn the right to work with those communities. And that's a really big insight, you know, especially in emergency situations, and you see earthquakes and natural disasters and civil wars, and people go in there to help, and they say, okay, you just sit there and we'll be good to you. Well, that's absolutely wrong, because it's presuming that they don't have any rights, and that you have to earn the privilege of working with them.
So, to ask a very complex question, how do you do that? How do you earn the right in the not-for-profit space to earn the right to have the privilege to work with and invest in a particular stakeholder?
You actually spend the time sitting down and talking with people, and okay, in an emergency situation where you've had a tsunami, which and I oversaw the World Vision's response to the tsunami in Southeast Asia. You don't have a lot of time to do talking to people, so some of the stuff you have to get food and water there very quickly. But the moment you've done some of that quick saving of life stuff, you then have to say, okay, what is it that you're wanting us to help you with in rebuilding your community? And so we were sometimes criticized for taking a bit longer about, for example, rebuilding houses. Why? Because we actually wanted to talk to these communities. What is the sort of accommodation you need, rather than just slapping up barrack-like accommodation, and then wandering away, and having other opportunities to effectively listen. And one of the things that I think I've always felt is critically important: don't just jump in, listen first. You know, going back to my time in politics, you often hear in politics, oh, the president's first 100 days, the prime minister's first 100 days, and they're going to do this, this, and this, and each day is a new thing they've done. My preferred style had been to spend that first 100 days listening to people. Indeed, when I took over as CEO of World Vision Australia, my first 100 days, I met all the staff in groups of about 20 in World Vision Australia, which at that stage was an organization of about 400 people. And so I would have an hour-long session with groups of 20, and I would ask them just simple questions. Where do you think we're at? What do you think of the challenges? What do you think of the opportunities? I did not. I came in as a greenhorn to the sector, so I wasn't going to tell them what they should be doing. I wanted to listen to where they were at, and then reflectively, I processed all that, and I came back and said, "Look, this is what I'm hearing. This is my reactions. I don't always feel I'm with you on everything, but on other things, I've learned a lot, and let's go." And then we formed a whole new strategy as to which way we were going to go.
That's so good. Any leaders who are listening who are approaching a transition into a new role, I think should rewind that and listen again. I can't speak highly enough of your approach. I think I was just chatting with a leader the other day. I was on site with him. He's a wonderful leader who I work with, and he was telling me that he's been there for months now, and he's about to have his last meetings with, because he did exactly what you did. He scheduled all of these meetings with so that he could have the chance to sit down and listen to everyone. And I have so much respect for that, because they're very busy roles when you're in any sort of leadership role, particularly when you're starting. You're learning everything, but like you said, if you can listen first, I think that's got to be one of the top 5 sort of leadership keys that I've come across. Listen first in almost any situation, but particularly new roles.
Just coming back to this process, I did learn a huge amount, but also because I was a greenhorn to the sector, I was to sometimes able to ask questions that they had stopped asking, and when they heard the question again, they said, "Oh, okay, well, I forget why we do this," and so it was a case for them to be a bit of an eye opener for them. And on other occasions, I was able to actually have a bit of a helicopter view and say, "Look, what I'm hearing is this. Could we think about this as an option or whatever?" And again, for example, in the case of World Vision, a wonderful, wonderful organization. It was my privilege to work with them for 11 years, and I learned so much from them. And yet, I felt I was actually able to bring things to them which they had, in a sense, forgotten about, because they were so caught up in the day-to-day busyness of their ministry.
Yeah, that's so good, Lynn. I want to ask you about, as you reflect on your whole career so far, and like you said, you sort of you view yourself as sort of semi-retired, even though you're wearing a few hats at the moment. But across your career, who are some of the mentors who had the biggest positive influence on your leadership?
It's always valuable to actually have people who you can walk alongside, and they can help anchor you, and you can share issues with them. When I was teaching, I had there was an older teacher who just I didn't seek him out. He just sort of came alongside me, and we spent a lot of time just talking. He saw this untrained teacher who could easily have floundered, and he just very gently came into my space. When I was in politics, I found some of the people with longer service in Parliament. I was able to go to and just chew the fat with them, also unburden a bit. And by the way, that wasn't always just on my side of politics. I was able to find people on all sides who I would learn from. I would find them valuable. And in World Vision, people who had been working in the field a long time really put their lives at risk in many cases, to learn from them the philosophy that they had evolved over the time of their career helped me enormously. And now, of course, I'm in the church. It's so important again that I find sort of what we call spiritual directors, that you have one who you can just reflect with.
And I know I'm jumping from topics here, but I think it's so true where you mentioned the different mentors. Actually, I want to ask you. You mentioned politics. Can you think of any stories from your time in politics of how one of those mentors really helped you with a particular situation? I know I'm sort of putting you on the spot here. I didn't prep you for this, but anything that comes to mind?
Let me share a story that very, very early on, I was Minister of Education. I was a Minister of Education at a very young age. I was appointed 33 at the age of 33 to be the minister. It was my first portfolio. It was in those days, it was the largest area of government. These days, health is, but in the 80s, education was. So I was responsible for something like a third of the government budget, and I was very enthusiastic about doing things there. And I visited a lot of schools. I spoke with teachers and parents and students and community groups, and then I started introducing some changes of policy after having done this. And at one stage, somebody came up with an idea. One group came up with an idea, and we can talk about what that idea was if you want, but I want to talk about the sort of the principle involved here. And I was very, very taken with it. But it was quite a radical idea certainly for my side of politics. Let me tell you what it was. It was the idea that why shouldn't there be a Christian state school? Why shouldn't parents have the option of different types of schools without having to pay private fees? And so a group of Christians who later would become very active in the low-fee private school movement came to me and said, could you at least have a committee set up to investigate whether it's viable to have a Christian state school, which could be therefore an option for parents? I was taken with this idea. I knew there'd be a lot of work to be done, a lot of research to be done. And so I talked about it with my caucus committee. I talked about it. I mentioned it in cabinet. And then I went ahead and appointed the committee. Well, then in the estimates committee, one of the opposition had heard about this, and they asked me a question. Well, then some of my own side heard this whole issue in a bit of a different way, and they no longer liked the idea, and they effectively stopped me from going ahead. I had to stop the idea, and I was feeling a bit sorry for myself over this. And in the following cabinet meeting, I said to a colleague of mine, that I felt a bit unjustly done by. I mentioned it to you guys, well, there weren't only guys, there were women in cabinet as well, to you. And this colleague of mine, he said, Lynn, you didn't really, you told us what you wanted us to hear to help you feel good about making a decision, which actually didn't have all of our support. And if you really had thought about it, you weren't as transparent as you should have been. And I learned a huge amount from that. Yes, it's true. My communication, on reflection, had been very, very circumspect. I was deliberately, I guess what I was hoping for is that I'd get this through and everyone would see what a great idea it was, and then they'd all come on board, so they didn't really need to know all the detail at the start. And I'm so glad that happened to me at the start of my ministerial career.
Yeah.
Because it taught me, be very careful how you communicate to people, that they're actually hearing what you say. And if we have time, there's a parallel kind of story happened to me when I was in World Vision.
Yeah, yes, please.
I had some parallels, and it was I'd been in World Vision about 6 months, and I was so excited because these people were energized people. They had such wonderful energy. And I was a bit struck by the fact that some people had spent all their career working in one area, not another. And as somebody, and we talked at the start of the program about my preparedness for change, I was a bit taken aback that some people hadn't had much change in their life, and yet these were really energized, talented people who could so benefit from change. And so I talked with our HR people, and I said, have we thought about having a bit of a program to help people move from one area of the organization to another, to get new experiences? And so they liked the idea, and we called it the Motivate and Move program. And I got up, and you need to know, before I joined World Vision, there had been a bit of a financial crunch time, and they'd actually had to lay off some staff. And so when I came in, that was the backdrop. I called all the staff together in the Melbourne office, and I spooked about this wonderful idea of encouraging people to look at their possibilities, and Motivate and Move was now launched. And I felt very good. I went back to my office, and then a senior manager in the team who wasn't there spoke to me the next day and said, "Lynn, they tell me you're encouraging people to leave the organization." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm encouraging them to look at new opportunities within the organization." Well, that's what they're telling me. Anyway, I went to my personal assistant, and fortunately, she had recorded the whole thing. So I said, "Can I listen to the tape?" So I listened to the tape, and no, I certainly did not ask people to leave the organization. So I went back fully, somewhat indignant, I suppose, to my colleague, and I said, "Ian, I didn't tell them. I've just listened to the tape." And without batting an eyelid, he just said, "Yeah, I've no doubt that's true, Lynn, but that's what they heard you say." And then I realized what he was telling me is that, look, you've come into an organization where there had been some uncertainty before you came. You're a new kid on the block, they don't know you, and you're saying something quite challenging to them. And so they're fearing that this means there's job cuts on the way. And so this idea of, while I knew what I said, unless you actually have other people understand what you say, you haven't really said it at all.
Yeah, that's so profound. I think that's got to be one of the biggest revelations I've ever had, as a as a leader, is the difference between saying something, communicating something, and what people actually hear. And I think that's a
Yes.
lesson I've learned the hard way. Is no, but I definitely never said that. But like your colleague said with such wisdom, yeah, but that's not what they heard. And I think the
Mm.
challenge, if you can, that's a different level, isn't it? How do you communicate so that you
Absolutely.
really articulate, not just that you articulate it well, but that people walk away and they've heard the heart and the clarity of whatever message you're saying.
Well, one of the ways, of course, is that whenever you have the opportunity, give people the chance then and there to ask questions, discuss it, to feel comfortable about being pretty brazen in their comments.
Hmm.
And so when I joined Anglicare, which I went to after World Vision, and I became the CEO of Anglicare South Australia, I used to have a regular town meeting, or a couple of town meetings a month, and I would go out to the different offices and regions, and I would talk for maybe 10 minutes. But for the rest of the time, I said, "Okay, tell me what it is on your heart. And by the way, don't feel pressured that I'm the boss, and you don't want to put yourself in a bad light." I even had set up an email system that they could send questions to the HR people anonymously, and I would guarantee I would answer them in the town meeting, even though I didn't know who the person was, if they weren't prepared to actually stand up and give their name.
Yeah, I think some ideas like that we have to you have to put yourself in the shoes of people and actually try to find a way that you remove as many barriers as possible to clearly hear what people want to ask. And I like your approach, Lynn, that you address it clearly as well and say whatever you bring up, I will, because I think one of my favorite books, Blue Ocean Strategy, talks about this idea that it starts with engagement when you want to transform any organization, but the next step is explaining. And I think a lot of us miss that step. We engage, we listen really well, but then there's parts of it that we're disagreeing with what people have said, and we sort of like to put our head in the sand and
Mm,
just ignore it, rather than actually giving people that explanation to say, like you said before, by the way, here are the things I've heard. I'm with you on this. I'm with you on this. Now, this part here, I've heard you say this, this, and this, but I actually believe, or we're going to be doing this, this, or this. And I think when you make that clear,
yeah.
people, as long as that process is fair, which is what they talk about in that book, I think people go, okay, you know what? At least I feel like things are being said clearly and it's a fair process.
I actually had a matrix that I developed, which when we used to do 360-degree things, I used to report all my feedback that they had given me to my staff, so they knew that I wasn't hiding anything. If there would always be a warts and all situation here, so they would hear the warts and all. But before I did so, I put this matrix up, and the matrix had parameters, or two pairs of parameters. One was surprised, not surprised. In other words, what they told me surprised me, or what they told me didn't surprise me. The other parameter of the matrix was will change, or will try to change. The other one won't change. And then you end up with 4 quadrants. So, for example, in the surprised box, will change. These are things I was surprised to hear, and I didn't know that, folks. And so I will work to see how I can improve my performance with respect to that there. Then in the unsurprised area, there was still a will change one, because what I would say there is that, look, I actually, if you'd have asked me about certain of my aspects and leadership styles and so on, I would have said that. But now that you've told me again, it's made me think that because it matters to you, maybe I need to think about whether I should change some aspects of that. But then on the won't change side, there were unsurprised and surprised bits. But what essentially happened there is that there were some things that I'm mandated to do. My job as a CEO is to take the organization to this spot. I'm required by my board, or by my, not that I had shareholders, but if I did, by shareholders. And therefore, there are some things I'm going to do that people aren't necessarily going to like. And yes, I'm surprised you've raised it, or I'm not surprised you've raised it, but frankly, it's my mandate. This is what I've got to do. And in a sense, government have mandates as well. And then there are other areas in the won't change bit that won't change because you can't change. One thing that I was inevitably being surprised by a number of times, because I always forget it, is I'm quite a big person. I'm 6'3", 190 centimeters, and so I can loom a bit large in a room, and some people said, you're a bit daunting when you stand up there and talk, and we feel a bit overwhelmed sometimes, because I've got a deep voice, and so it sort of booms out. And one of the things I had to say to them is, well, frankly, I can't do anything about my height, except sit down, perhaps. And I use that as a technique sometimes. I didn't stand; I sat to talk. And my voice, well, sorry, that's my voice. So anyway, my point, I'm going on a bit long here, but my point here is that when you go through this opening up what people have said, they need to know how you're processing it.
Yes.
And that's why I had this matrix of four quadrants.
I really like that. Can you give us the 4 quadrants again?
Well, the one on the one side is surprised by what they said and will seek to change. Another one was not surprised by what they said, but will still seek to change. And then on the other side, surprised by what you said, but not going to change, either because it's my mandate that this is my job, or I actually can't change. And then the other one was not surprised by what you've said, but again, won't change because of mandate, or because of this is the way the world is.
That's so good. I love that. I love that matrix. That's really, really helpful. I think your matrix there addresses a key gap, which is people can get really good at listening, but then how do you? It's that helping people feel heard piece again, isn't it? Because sometimes the only way for someone,
absolutely, very much,
they have to have the feedback loop, don't they? We've got to close that loop.
Exactly. Yeah. Otherwise, what you've done is just satisfied yourself that you've spoken, and therefore you can go away and feel that it's all going to be okay. That might not be the case.
That's wonderful, Lynn. Well, I'm just looking at the clock here, and this is so much fun. Maybe I'd love to invite you back for a part 2 down the track, because I feel like we've just hit the tip of the iceberg for Reverend Dr. Lynn Arnold's stories. I feel like there's a whole bank of them we could maybe get into in some more episodes down the track.
Be happy to participate if that's of any help.
Oh, this is so good. I think listeners are going to enjoy it. Let's jump into Leadership Express as we land today, and just for a few quick questions. The first one is about a book. I'm wondering if there's a book that you've gifted to other people again and again, or recommended to people again and again.
The Jim Collins' Good to Great is a great book, but an even greater book is Good to Great and the Social Sector. It's greater for two reasons. One, it's 1/5 the size, but two, it actually targets the social sector in a very distinctive way that talks about the combination of executive leadership and what he refers to as legislative leadership. But in fact, that's leadership that has people join you on the journey.
Yeah.
So Jim Collins is those two books.
I've had Good to Great mentioned a lot, but I haven't had the social sector, the shorter version focused on the social sector. That's an incredible recommendation. I know anyone involved in the social sector, maybe many people who aren't, will be jumping on that recommendation. That's wonderful, Lynn. Thank you.
Well, when I joined Anglicare, because I'd been introduced to this in World Vision, I gave a copy to all of my board members and all of my senior management, and I said, if you want to know what sort of person I'm going to be or hope to be, then read this book.
That's so good. Wonderful recommendation. One-on-one meetings. This is something leaders ask about all the time. What advice would you give to leaders about running great one-on-ones with their direct reports?
It's so easy to spend your time talking to somebody, not enough time listening to somebody. And so I've been in meetings where I've not been the caller of the meeting. In other words, I've been responding to somebody else and been a bit disconcerted when they seem to do all the talking. When the meeting has been for me to come in and explain something. So I try not to be the one who dominates the conversation. Let it be an opportunity for people to canvass, and then my role to be as much as possible to help facilitate the discussion. Now, obviously, there are some one-on-one meetings where the situation is going to be different, but we're talking in a broad category here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's wonderful advice. Do you have any favorite quotes, Lynn, over time that have really stuck with you, or that are the sort of quotes you frame and put on the wall or have in the back of your mind?
Well, I'm not sure quite how they connect to leadership, but I was often asked in my later years in World Vision, had World Vision met all my expectations? Because it had been a big leap of faith to go into such a different sector to my previous career. And my answer to that was, World Vision met all my expectations, albeit in ways that I never expected. And it sounded an oxymoron of a statement, but it actually meant something enormous to me, because I walked into it with some expectations, really great expectations, but by not straitjacketing myself to those expectations, I ended up being given an even wider field of expectations beyond my imagining. It's very Ephesians 3:20, by the way. Beyond all you can ask or imagine. That's what God is like. Well, I try to tell people, don't so straitjacket your expectations that you end up limiting how far you can go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Very, very well said. When it comes to another topic that comes up again and again, it's about morning routine. You know, people, young leaders, leaders who are managing, being in the C-suite for the first time, and the added responsibility, or a team that's spread across different states. Time management comes up, and people inevitably ask about the morning routine. Do you have any advice from your years in leadership? Is there anything that's pivotal to your morning routine, or just any thoughts on that topic?
Well, first of all, opening the day with private prayer is very important. Settling in your own mind what are the tasks you hope to complete, or at least significantly advance during the day, that you want to see done and that you know others will want to see done. I also used to find that I'd very often on my way to work just stop off and have a coffee with myself, and just some quiet time after I'd had my prayers beforehand, after I'd done that sort of thinking, but just have a bit of quiet time just to pace my own mind so that it didn't then get sort of run over by the busyness of the day that might be ahead. I'm a big believer in time out of silent reflection, silent prayer. I used to do it when I was in Parliament, when I was Premier, for example. I would close my office door for half an hour before question time. Nobody could come near my office at that time. Staff, or the advisors and all the others. I needed to have half a time when I just settled my mind before going into the fray of question time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think, once again, if we come back to, as a whole culture, we are really, there's this real fascination with mindfulness and meditation and silence, and so as a as a Christian myself, I really appreciate you talking not only about silence, but the silent and meditative prayer. And yeah,
Mm.
I think it is, when you look at 2022 compared to, say, 100 years ago. I think it's possibly only become more important to have that quiet reflection time in such a busy society.
The I certainly agree. And the other thing which I would encourage people to think about, where it's possible, have some control of your own diary. Now, that's not always possible because aspects of your diary are given to you by others, sort of more senior to you. But the don't allow the diary just to get filled up by others without you being invested in what's going in there. And when I first became a minister of the Crown, it was often, I learned very quickly that the practice has often been with ministers that people go to your staff and they say, I want to meet the minister, and they get put in the diary. And so suddenly the minister finds he or she's got 40 hours of back-to-back meetings in a week or more. And there's no time to feel that you're invested in that. So I didn't want to be a blocker to people seeing me, and my track record of seeing people and visiting schools and visiting facilities stands for itself as a very good record. But I wanted some ownership of when and how I did that, so that I didn't feel harried or harassed. Rather, I felt that no, this is now a more equal situation between myself and the person or the group or the site that I'm going to.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's amazing advice, and just it's funny because I talked with a lot of leaders who are in sectors, as an example, maybe schools, where there's a lot of different roles that don't normally have assistants or executive assistants. And often your really senior roles do, but I'm often challenging people to think differently. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's a similar thought, to think differently about your schedule. And in those sort of roles, sometimes I feel like what people need, but isn't the norm in that industry, is having someone external to them who's really controlling it for them, and that's what an assistant does. And so
Mm.
it's funny that whatever you need to do to create that control over your own schedule, which, like you said, some people in different industries are limited, or different roles, they are limited in that. But if you can create more control,
Mm.
which sometimes, like I say to these busy school leaders, you know what, you are so busy, you may just need someone else to have their head in your schedule, so that they can be thinking about that all the time. And but it can be
The
lots of
important
different
thing
roles.
is that that person the important thing is that that person, you have confidence in that person, and that that person can think inside your head. In other words, that they know, look, I know Lynn needs some space between meetings of this sort and meetings of another sort, or Lynn needs to have some time to get ready for the big thing he's got coming up in a couple of days, and give himself some things. And so I was lucky that I had personal assistants who got to know my style, and therefore they didn't just regard my diary as a blank sheet of paper that they could fill up as they wanted. They thought ahead into my mind, and I had confidence that they would do that after a time.
Absolutely. Well, last question for you, Lynn, and this has just been so much fun to have a chance to really chat about your story. If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say to them?
One piece of leadership advice to a young leader. Um, Well, think about what it is that you actually really believe you want to achieve and make that bigger than just your role as the leader in trying to achieve that. Now, that sounds a bit convoluted, but what I mean is that it's not about you, it's about the goal you're trying to achieve. And that if you really think that way, and the goal is really that important to you, then ultimately the goal could well happen. Your own role will disappear in time, but the goal will still have succeeded. And that surely is what leadership should be about. It's what Jim Collins talks about in Level 5 leadership, where he talks about the CEO. The CEO sits on the veranda of his or her retirement house and looks into the future of an organization that they left in a good shape and will now go to better places because of having left it in a good shape, but better places nevertheless.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and a great thought to land on. For those who've really enjoyed today, just wondering if there are any social media channels where people can follow you or connect with you, Lynn.
Well, I am on Facebook. I do have a Twitter account, which I these days I tend more to monitor everyone else's tweets rather than putting a great deal on myself. And of course, that's just the social media things. And then otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn, um, and so people can contact me that way as well.
Well, for our listeners, I want to thank you for tuning in. If you have really appreciated something Lynn has shared today, then do reach out to him on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, and just let him know. I know that always means a lot to my guests. And don't forget, I also have the John O. White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast. They're two other places you can go to continue to invest in your leadership. But I want to finish today with a really big thank you to you, the Reverend Dr. Lynn Arnold. I promised I wouldn't call you that the whole time, but it has meant a lot to me to have you on the podcast. I don't underestimate the experience that you have in different roles as Premier of South Australia and as CEO, and in some really significant roles. As expected, your advice today has just been full of wisdom. So it's also been a joy to spend time with you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, I've enjoyed the conversation enormously. Thank you so much, John. It's been a real treat.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me. Well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, And it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, John O. White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out John O. White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.